line segments that have the same length are called congruent segments. So this symbol that you see right here, this is your symbol for congruent. So notice that it's an equal sign with a squiggly on top. That means congruent. So lengths are equal. Lengths are equal. That's going to be what you see right here. Segments are congruent. Segments are congruent. And so what I want you to notice here is that, remember I told you that with the length, you're just going to write the two letters, right? So you have AB is equal to CD. So over here on this picture, you see this is AB, this is CD. Their lengths are equal. Well, this red line here that you see here tells me that those two segments are congruent. That's what those two lines mean, that they're congruent. Now, I also want you to notice that when I talk about equality, I just have AB is equal to CD. But when I talk about congruent, I have segment AB, segment CD, and then I have the congruent symbol. So notice that the things that are normal, you just have the letters, versus if they're congruent, then they all have something above. So just kind of remember that to help you. Congruent means same size and same shape. Okay. So these two lines up here have the same size and the same shape. All right. So the midpoint of a segment divides the segment into two congruent segments. So here I have segment AB. Now, M right here in the middle is the midpoint of segment AB. This time, as different from earlier, notice that this one now has 2 bars. The reason there are 2 bars is because I want you to know that segment AM is congruent to segment MB. So these are congruent, which is right here. But they're different from the segments that are at the top. Because if I had just put one line, then that would mean that AB is congruent to CD and AM and MB, but they're not. So I'm only using 2 lines to distinguish from the top versus the bottom to know that they are different lengths. And so then M is the midpoint of segment AB. And so by definition, the midpoint divides a segment into 2 congruent segments. So because M is the midpoint, I can then say that segment AM is congruent to segment MB. And then by those segments being congruent, then I can say that their lengths are, I don't know what I just did, y'all. Okay, sorry. So by them being equal, I can say that about the segments being congruent, I can say that their lengths are equal. So I hope that makes sense. A segment bisector is a point, ray, line segment, or plane that intersects. That should have an S. That intersects the segment at its midpoint. So in this particular case of the image that you see, the green line is, we're going to call that line CD. So that's going to be line CD that you see here. Line CD is a segment bisector of segment AB. How do we for sure know that it's a segment bisector? We for sure know because, again, there are these red marks here that tell us that those 2 segments are congruent. So because those 2 segments are congruent, then we know that the line that's passing through at M is going to be our segment bisector. So line CD is a segment bisector, segment AB. So segment AM is congruent to segment MB, and the length of AM is equal to the length of MB. So example number 6, point M is the midpoint of segment VW. Find the length of segment VN. Oops. All right, so let's do that. All right, so when I look at my picture, I already know because the instructions told me that M is, I don't know what kind of typing I was doing. I already know that M is the midpoint of VW. And so VM is congruent to MW, and those are segments. So those segments are congruent, and because those segments are congruent, then their lengths are equal. And so if their lengths are equal, then we know that 4x minus 1 is equal to 3x plus 3. And now I can solve this. So I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides because it's the smallest. So I have x minus 1 is equal to 3. I'm going to add 1 to both sides. So x is equal to 4. Now, what's important here is that you make sure, again, that you read the question. It says find the length of segment VM. So right now, all we know is that x is equal to 4. We now have to find the length of VM. So VM is equal to 4x minus 1. So that's going to be 4 times 4 minus 1, which means that's 16 minus 1. So VM is equal to 15. And that is the answer that we're looking for, because we have to make sure that we answer the question. If we just get to x equals 4, that's not answering the question. So we have to make sure we answer the question. Example number 7 says identify the segment bisector of segment PQ and then find MQ. So what I'd really like for you to do right now is, I know you've been pausing all the way through, but I'd like you to go ahead and pause here right now and work on this one on your own before you look at me working it out. So pause your video now, work on this example, and then come back once you have an answer to see if your work compares to my work. All right, so the first thing it says is that you need to identify the segment bisector. So when I look, again, I see the red marks, one here and one here. So that means that those two segments are congruent. So then that is going to tell me that L is the segment bisector. And remember, there are two ways to name a line. You can name it by a lowercase script or 2 points on the line. We don't know 2 points on the line, so it's going to be labeled by our lowercase script. So now I'm going to work through the problem because it says find MQ. So because L is a segment bisector, then I know that segment PM is congruent to segment MQ. And because the segments are congruent, their lengths are equal. So that means that 5x minus 3 is equal to 11 minus 2x. I'm going to add 2x to both sides because it's the smaller of the x's. So 7x minus 3 is equal to 11. Going to add 3 to both sides. So 7x is equal to 14. Divide both sides by 7. So x is equal to 2. But am I done? Absolutely not, because my instructions say find the length of MQ. MQ is equal to 11 minus 2x. So that's going to be 11 minus 2 times 2. And so that means that that's going to be 11 minus 4. So MQ would be equal to 7. And now I'm done because I've done what the directions have asked me to do. And that's a 7. Let's see. That's a 7. All right.